They hanged an Apache mother for birthing twins. A rancher heard her cries. His next move changed all. The dusk was heavy that day, pressing down upon the little town, like a hand unwilling to release its grip. The gallows had been repaired just that morning, its beams smelling of raw pine, the rope swaying as if it knew the life it would soon choke. Men, women, and children gathered in a crooked half-circle, faces taut with judgment, curiosity, or fear. No one spoke loudly. It was as though even the air hesitated, knowing cruelty was about to be passed off as justice. At the center stood the woman they had condemned. She was Apache, her dark hair braided loosely, her face cut with the soft shadows of exhaustion. In her arms rested two newborn girls, swaddled in cloth too thin to keep out the cool of evening. The twins cried in turns, small trembling voices that should have inspired tenderness. Instead, they fueled whispers. A curse, they called it. Two girls born together to an Apache mother was an omen, proof of unnatural blood. She did not answer the murmurs. Her arms curled protectively around her daughters, her eyes fixed not on the faces around her, but on the horizon where the sun bled itself against the mountains. She seemed determined to leave this world with her gaze upon beauty rather than hatred. The preacher, red-faced from whiskey, lifted a hand and called for silence. He read words from a weathered Bible, his voice thick and uneven. He said the twins were a mark against God's order, that the mother had offended heaven by bringing them forth. Men muttered in agreement, eager to place their cruelty upon Scripture. At the edge of the gathering, leaning against a hitching post, stood a rancher of 30 years. His coat bore dust from the long trail, his boots scarred by work more than travel. He was known to many yet close to none, a man who had spoken little since the loss of his wife 3 winters past. In his silence, folks mistook him for hard, but silence was only his shield. Tonight, though his eyes betrayed him, he could not look away from the Apache mother, nor from the frail wailing of her children. Something in that sound clawed at the hollow he carried inside, the hollow left when his own wife and unborn child were buried in the same grave. The rope was lowered, looped rough around the woman's neck. She kissed her daughters on their foreheads, her lips trembling only then. For the first time she looked down upon the crowd, but not with hatred. Her eyes were wide, as if pleading wordlessly for one soul, any soul, to remember her humanity. None stepped forward. The trapdoor beneath her feet creaked with impatient weight. When it fell, the sound was not a roar but a crack, sudden and final. The twins screamed in her arms, the rope biting cruel against her skin. The crowd flinched as one, yet no one moved. The preacher declared justice served. Folks turned away, eager for supper, eager to forget. Only the rancher remained where he stood, hands fixed at his sides. The noise of boots faded, the twilight deepened, and still he stood watching. A strange unease filled him. The woman's legs twitched, not with death, but with life refusing to yield. The rope had caught uneven, the knot slipping against the wood. Her breath came ragged, torn but present. The twins cried louder, desperate and alive. The rancher's chest tightened. He had told himself 1,000 times that he was finished interfering with life, that the world chose its course with or without him. But the sound of those children's cries was not something he could ride away from. It pierced deeper than reason, deeper than memory. It reached that wound in him which never closed. He moved forward, quick and steady, boots silent on the dirt. In the dying light, he drew the knife from his belt and sawed at the rope until it frayed apart. She collapsed into his arms, her body light with weakness, her daughters clutched against her breast. For a moment she looked up at him, confusion flickering through the haze of near death. Then her eyes closed and she sagged into unconsciousness. No one returned to stop him. The town had scattered like cowards after feeding their cruelty. He carried her across the edge of the settlement where his horse waited, a tall bay with patient eyes. He laid her gently across the saddle, cradled the twins in his arms, and mounted. The prairie stretched ahead, wide, open, merciful in its distance. The ride was long, the stars emerging one by one above, their glow silver upon the grasses. The babies whimpered and quieted as he shifted them close, his heart hammering with a strange rhythm he had not felt in years. When the cabin came into view, a squat wooden shape in the dark, he felt relief flood him, though he had never before brought another soul there since his wife's passing. Inside, the cabin was simple, a hearth of stone, a rough-hewn table, a bed that sagged at the center. He set the twins into a wooden box lined with cloth, close enough to the fire's warmth. Then he laid their mother upon the bed, her skin pale beneath the bruises, her breath shallow but sure. He worked with care, as if tending a wounded horse, removing the ropes burned from her neck with cool cloths, feeding the fire, heating water. Her lashes fluttered but did not open. He spooned broth to her lips, coaxing her to swallow small sips. All the while the twins cried, and he discovered a strange steadiness in himself as he rocked them, his large hands supporting both tiny heads at once. Their weight was slight, yet their presence filled the cabin with something more powerful than silence. Hours passed. At last she stirred, eyes opening to the dim glow of firelight. She shifted, reaching instinctively for her daughters, fear tightening her features when she saw him. He stepped back, letting her gather them close. She whispered to them in her tongue, her words soft as wind across reeds. He did not speak. He only nodded once, then moved to the table, giving her space, letting her know she was safe without demanding gratitude. He had learned that words could wound as much as knives when offered wrongly. When dawn came, she sat upright by the fire, rocking the girls. He brought bread and water, setting them near, without intrusion. Her eyes lifted to him, wary but not ungrateful. Days bled one into another. She healed slowly, strength returning like water, seeping back into dry ground. He taught her nothing of himself, only offered quiet care. Firewood stacked by the hearth, water drawn fresh, milk left in a tin for her. She never thanked him in words, but he saw the gratitude in the way her gaze softened when she watched him cradle one of the twins. She began to rise and move about the cabin, her presence altering it. She sang low songs as she worked, her voice lifting gently against the rafters. He pretended not to listen, though the sound filled something hollow inside him. She mended a tear in his coat one morning, leaving it folded neatly by the chair. He wore it without comment, but his silence carried warmth now rather than distance. The town whispered, of course. A widow from down the road came by once, suspicion sharp in her eyes. Yet when she saw the twins cooing in their mother's arms, some of her hardness cracked. She did not speak harshly, only left with pursed lips and a loaf of bread she claimed she could spare. One evening, as the sky burned orange, he found her outside the cabin, sitting on a log with her daughters. The babies laughed at a fluttering bird, their joy rising high. She turned to him then, her expression neither fearful nor closed, but something softer, searching. For the first time she spoke his name, quietly, as though testing whether it could be trusted upon her tongue. He answered simply, voice rough from disuse. His gaze lingered on the twins, then lifted to her. No promises were made, no declarations. Only an understanding, faint but firm, that their lives had turned upon an unseen hinge. The prairie wind rose, carrying with it the smell of earth and pine. He stood with her in silence, the horizon wide before them. The world had tried to hang her into silence, yet here she breathed, her daughters alive, his cabin no longer empty. It was not peace yet, nor was it safety, but was beginning. The days unfolded like pages in a book neither of them had thought they would live to read. The cabin, once steeped in silence, began to echo with the fragile laughter of children and the low murmur of lullabies. She moved with care through the rooms, her daughters held always close, her steps soft upon the worn wooden floor. He watched her from a distance, his quiet nature a shield, but each day that passed made the shield thinner. What had begun as necessity, her survival under his roof, slowly turned into something else, though neither dared name it. The twins grew restless, as all infants do. At night their cries pierced the stillness, and he would rise from his bed before she asked, taking one child into his arms, rocking her gently until the sound waned into breathy sighs. She would watch from the shadows, her eyes filled with something she had not let herself feel in years, trust. Not the trust of survival, but the fragile, growing belief that she and her daughters might finally belong somewhere. The prairie, broad and indifferent, became their world. Together they worked small tasks. He showed her how to mend a fence, his hands guiding the post upright, her smaller ones steadying the wire. She taught him words in her tongue, not for lessons, but because the girls cooed when she spoke, and he wanted to share that sound. He learned to hum the melodies she carried, though his voice was low and unsteady, more rhythm than tune. Still, the twins smiled when he tried, and that was enough to make him continue. But peace never lives long, without envy creeping in. The town that had sought to hang her soon learned she had not perished. Whispers rustled through the saloon and church pews. The preacher spat sermons thick with venom, and some men nodded too quickly, eager to place their discomfort into words of righteousness. A few rode out to the rancher's land, stopping at his gate, demanding he send her back to face what they called unfinished justice. He met them with steady eyes, his voice a flat refusal. They muttered threats, but none dared push further that day. She heard the whispers, too, carried to her by a young boy who sometimes came with milk or news. He warned her that the men were growing restless, that they spoke of taking her by force. She listened without fear in her face, though her hands trembled when she held her daughters. She thought of leaving, sparing him the burden of her presence. Yet when she looked upon his face, calm even in the storm of rumor, she could not bring herself to speak it aloud. One evening, as the fire burned low, she sat by the hearth and whispered truths she had never given voice. She told him how her own kin had been scattered, how she had carried her daughters alone through hunger and cold until the town's rope found her. She said she had grown used to being seen as a burden, as a shadow too heavy to carry. Her eyes flickered to his face then, waiting for pity, waiting for distance. Instead, he rose without words, crossed to the cradle, and lifted one daughter into his arms. Then the other. He rocked them both, his broad chest becoming their shelter, and only when their eyes drifted close did he return them to her side. In that silence something shifted, not through words but through gesture. He had answered her confession not with pity, but with care. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, tender and frightening. She wondered if this was what it meant to be seen not as a burden, but as a soul worth keeping. The storm came soon after, a night wrapped in cloud and wind, when torches burned bright against the dark. Men rode up to the ranch, their voices carrying across the open fields, harsh with drink and anger. They called for him to send her out, to end what they believed unfinished. The twins woke crying, their small hands clinging to their mother's dress. She stood in the cabin doorway, fear clawing her chest, but she did not step aside. He moved past her slowly, rifle in hand, his figure steady against the flicker of firelight. The men laughed at his defiance, calling him a fool, telling him no land or woman was worth standing against a town. He said little, his voice quiet but unyielding. They would not take her. Not the mother, not the children. The night erupted in gunfire. Sparks flew as bullets struck wood, the acrid scent of powder choking the air. She shielded the twins, pressing them into the far corner, but when a window shattered she grabbed a fallen pistol and fired into the dark, her hands steady despite the tremor of her heart. Together they fought, not for glory but for life, the cabin walls trembling with the fury outside. He was grazed by a shot along his arm, blood seeping through his sleeve, yet he did not falter. His stance was a wall between them and the men who sought to undo everything. At last, the torches faltered, the men retreating into the night with curses on their tongues. Silence fell heavy afterward, broken only by the thin cries of the twins and the rasp of his breath. She dropped the pistol, rushing to his side. Her hands trembled as she tore cloth to bind his wound, her tears falling freely now that danger had passed. He let her fuss, let her pour the fear and care she had hidden into her touch. When his eyes lifted to hers, they held not just gratitude but something unspoken, something that had been waiting in the quiet spaces between them. The dawn came soft and golden, spilling across the prairie like forgiveness. Smoke curled from the charred wood outside, but inside the cabin there was calm. She sat with her daughters nestled in her lap, his coat draped around her shoulders. He sat close, his bandaged arm resting easy. They did not speak of what had happened. Words were not needed. In their silence bloomed an understanding. This was no longer a house of one man. It had become a home. If this tale touched your heart, kindly subscribe and join us by the fire for more Wild West stories.